11 miles off the Irish coast, a grandmother hands her infant granddaughter to a complete stranger. "Take her," she begs. "I can't swim." Seconds later, both women plunge into the freezing Atlantic as the RMS Lusitania, one of the world's largest ships, disappears beneath the waves in just 18 minutes. The year was 1915, and what happened next would be buried under a century of lies, cover-ups, and forgotten heroes. This isn't the story of a simple maritime accident. It's a tale of secret sacrifice and a global conflict that showed no mercy. You think you know the Lusitania story? You don't know the half of it. Before Titanic became synonymous with disaster, there was Lusitania, faster, more luxurious, and carrying a secret that would cost 1,198 people their lives. When she launched in 1906, she wasn't just a ship. She was a floating palace. Picture a vessel longer than 2 city blocks, with elevators, a gymnasium, and first-class suites that cost more than a working man's annual salary. Her dining room's dome rose 2 decks high, crowned with a glass skylight that bathed wealthy passengers in natural light as they dined on turtle soup and champagne. She could cross the Atlantic in under 5 days, a record that made her the undisputed pride of Britain and the pinnacle of ocean travel. What the travel brochures didn't mention was her dual purpose. Lusitania was built with government money under one condition. In times of war, she could be converted into an armed merchant cruiser. Those elegant promenade decks were reinforced to carry naval guns. That record-breaking speed was designed specifically to outrun enemy submarines. When World War I erupted in 1914, Lusitania kept carrying passengers, but her cargo manifests began telling a different story. She was a greyhound of the seas, but she was also a potential weapon of war, hiding in plain sight as a civilian liner, a fact that would have horrifying consequences for everyone on board. On May 1, 1915, she departed New York for Liverpool on her final voyage. Among her 1959 passengers and crew were 129 children, including 39 infants. Also aboard, though not on any public passenger list, were 4.2 million rounds of ammunition, 1,250 cases of shrapnel shells, and 50 barrels of aluminum powder. The ship was quite literally a floating bomb with babies on board, sailing directly into a declared war zone. This fatal combination of civilian life and military cargo set the stage for a tragedy that would blur the lines between an act of war and a massacre, sparking outrage across the globe. On the morning Lusitania departed, the German embassy published a chilling warning in 50 American newspapers, placed directly beside Cunard Line's advertisement. It read, "Travelers sailing in the war zone on ships of Great Britain do so at their own risk." Passengers laughed it off as a bluff. Captain William Turner, a veteran seaman with 44 years at sea, dismissed it as German propaganda. But German U-boat commander Walter Schwieger wasn't laughing. He was lurking off the Irish coast in U-20 with orders to sink large English transports. The warning was not a threat. It was a promise that Germany intended to keep. At 2:10 p.m. on May 7th, Schwieger raised his periscope. What he saw made him double-check his charts. Lusitania, 4 massive funnels, an unmistakable profile heading straight for him. He could hardly believe his luck. He ordered 1 torpedo fired, just 1. At that moment, life on board was peaceful. Children played on deck. Millionaire Alfred Vanderbilt played cards in first class. In second class, Professor Ian Holborn was teaching 12-year-old Avis Dolphin to tie sailors' knots. In third class, Alice Lines was putting her baby Audrey down for a nap. None of them knew their world was about to end. The torpedo struck between the first and second funnels, but here's where the official story falls apart. Witnesses describe not 1, but 2 explosions. The first was the torpedo. The second, far more powerful, came from within the ship itself, a catastrophic detonation that the British government would spend decades denying. Immediately, Lusitania listed 15 degrees to starboard. The elaborate electrical system failed. Elevators stopped between floors, trapping passengers in ornate cages. The severe list made launching lifeboats on the port side impossible as they swung inward. On the starboard side, boats swung out so far that passengers had to make terrifying jumps to reach them. The chaos of the evacuation was horrific. Third-class passenger Margaret Guire watched as a lifeboat descended too quickly, spilling its occupants into the sea. "They fell like rag dolls," she later testified. "The children made no sound at all." Another boat got tangled in its ropes and hung vertically, dumping 60 people into the water below. Of the ship's 48 lifeboats, only 6 were successfully launched. The ship that was supposed to be safer than the Titanic, equipped with more than enough lifeboats for everyone, had become a death trap in a matter of minutes due to the speed and violence of its sinking. In the chaos, acts of extraordinary heroism emerged. Alfred Vanderbilt, the millionaire who couldn't swim, gave his life jacket to a young mother. When offered another, he pointed to an elderly woman. "Save the women and children first." He was last seen tying life jackets to baby baskets, turning them into makeshift life rafts. Meanwhile, Professor Ian Holborn found young Avis Dolphin on the sloping deck. He grabbed her hand and didn't let go. As the ship tilted beyond 45 degrees, they slid down the deck together into the ocean. He kept her afloat for 3 hours until rescue came, saving her life. Ship's detective William Pierpoint performed perhaps the most heartbreaking heroism of all. He stood at the rail, catching babies and toddlers thrown up by desperate parents who were already in the water. He'd grabbed the small children mid-air and then tossed them to passengers in the lifeboats below. Witnesses counted him saving over 20 children as the ship went down. He remained at his post until the very end, sacrificing his life to give those children a chance at survival. These selfless acts stand as a testament to the courage displayed in the face of an unimaginable disaster, a light in the darkest of moments. Of the 129 children aboard, 94 drowned. Of the 39 infants, 35 perished. These numbers hide individual tragedies that would break your heart. 5-year-old Lorraine Kay was placed in a lifeboat by her mother, but the rope snapped, plunging the child into the sea. Her mother jumped after her and both drowned, their bodies found days later still clutched together. The Crompton family, parents and 6 children, had survived a torpedo attack on another ship months earlier. This time, all 8 of them were lost. The water temperature, just 52 degrees Fahrenheit, meant most children who survived the sinking died of hypothermia within minutes. Alice Lines, the homesick mother from 3rd class, managed to get her baby daughter Audrey into a lifeboat, but it capsized. Alice spent 2 hours in the freezing water, holding Audrey above the waves with all her strength. When she was finally pulled into another boat, Alice was alive, but Audrey was not. The psychological trauma was too much for Alice to bear. She spent the rest of her life in an asylum, clutching a doll she insisted was her lost child. Her story represents the unseen wounds of the tragedy, the survivors who never truly escaped the sinking of the Lusitania. Within hours of the sinking, the British Admiralty began crafting a narrative of German barbarism and British innocence. But the truth was far murkier. First, the ammunition. For decades, the British government denied that Lusitania carried munitions. Documents released in the 1960s proved she was carrying enough ammunition to kill millions, arguably making her a legitimate military target. Second, the missing escorts. Despite knowing U-boats were active, the Admiralty provided no naval protection. Some historians believe this was a deliberate act by Winston Churchill to create an incident that would drag America into the war against Germany. Third, the second explosion. Divers in the 1990s discovered that Lusitania's hull was blown outward, not inward, confirming an internal explosion. The aluminum powder in her cargo, when mixed with seawater, creates an incredibly volatile reaction. This harmless powder may have been what doomed the ship to sink so quickly. Captain Turner survived, but was made the scapegoat, blamed for not zigzagging and for reducing speed. In reality, he was following contradictory Admiralty instructions. He lived another 18 years, haunted by survivors' guilt, repeatedly saying, "I followed my orders. Why did they die?" Of the 1,198 dead, 128 were Americans. This was 3 years before America entered World War I, and the public was firmly isolationist. The American press exploded with outrage, calling the sinking deliberate murder. President Woodrow Wilson, who had campaigned on keeping America out of the war, hesitated, sending only strongly worded letters to Germany. It would take 2 more years before America officially joined the fight. But public opinion had irrevocably shifted. The image of drowned American babies washed up on Irish beaches burned into the national consciousness. When America finally declared war in 1917, recruitment posters showed Lusitania sinking with one word: remember. While history remembers the famous dead, it forgot many ordinary heroes. Ship surgeon Dr. Joseph McDermott gave his life jacket to an elderly woman saying, "I'm a strong swimmer." He wasn't, and he drowned trying to save others. 18-year-old bellboy William Burroughs went cabin to cabin on the rapidly flooding lower decks, waking sleeping passengers and getting dozens out before the corridors filled with water. His body was never found. Catholic priest Father Basil Maturin gave away his life jacket and then stood on deck giving absolution to anyone who wanted it as the ship made its final plunge. Even today, questions remain. Why did the British government fight so hard to prevent salvage operations for decades? What was in the cargo hold they didn't want found? And perhaps most hauntingly, why were children's bodies found with life jackets on incorrectly, too loose to have saved them? It suggests panicked adults who didn't know how to properly secure them in the final moments. The safety drills that became mandatory after the Titanic disaster just a few years earlier did not save the children of the Lusitania. Their deaths were a tragic lesson learned too late. The Lusitania took 18 minutes to sink, but changed the 20th century forever. She proved that in modern warfare, there are no civilians, no innocents, and no mercy. Those 1,198 souls weren't just casualties. They were sacrificed on the altar of global politics and military strategy. Today, the wreck lies broken on the seabed, its grand staircase and playrooms slowly dissolving into the Atlantic sand.